Imagine giving advice to the US president on the future, the safety, security of artificial intelligence. Listen to this podcast because that's what today's guest, Peter Singer, delves into, episode 104 of the Grappling Growth podcast. Enjoy. As entrepreneurs, we all experience challenges in our business journey. I'm Joe Testori, and the Grappling Growth podcast is my attempt at documenting my entrepreneurial journey while building my brands. I sit down with fellow entrepreneurs, understanding how they grapple with growth. I hope you find value and enjoy. Peter, we got there in the end. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Peter, I'm curious. You know the question that's coming. What does growth look like to you?
I was thinking a lot about this, and my answer is one that encapsulates the definition of growth in terms of both your personal and your professional journey. For me, growth is defined as traveling down new roads. So on a personal side, it's new experiences, new lessons learned, new places traveling to, basically becoming a new person through gathering new ideas. Again, it's sort of that to me is growing as a person. And I think the same thing for an organization. It's adding, whether it's adding new clients, adding new products, adding new improvements to what you're doing, maybe even moving into new markets. So it's that idea of traveling to places that you've never been before is probably how I would define growth.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Going down new pathways that you haven't explored previously. That's I like that. Where do you think that idea, that definition comes from?
I think in many ways it derives from my personality as a kid. I think back to growing up. I was always trying out the new. Maybe it's something along the sort of psychology and how we're raised, but I was a voracious reader. Actually, as I look into my background, I'm like, oh, I've got books and the like behind me. I became a writer. That's a great way of experiencing the new. As a kid, I dreamed of traveling to new places. So yeah, I think that's just something ingrained in me on my personality side. And then the same thing as someone now running an organization, as I just believe in that idea firmly that you can reach a certain level of success, but that to me, by definition, to stay there, you're going to have to continually seek out the new. Again, whatever it took you to succeed, the market that you're entering is going to change, in part maybe because of what you're doing. And so if you're doing the very same thing that you were doing 5-10 years ago, I just don't think you can meet with success because the world's changing around you.
I was reading, it was only yesterday actually, a very strong book called The Science of Scaling by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, if you're familiar with it.
No, I'm not.
He's written some really, really strong business strategy books, co-authored with Dan Sullivan, 10X is Easy and 2X, a couple over books, The Gap is the Gain, I believe it's called, and a few more out there. But they... just a kind of memory log, they were talking about businesses that become the incumbents within the industry. And what typically they do, they start to go up market. So they start to say, well, we don't want to work with the lower caliber clientele. And what happens is new businesses come in, they take that market share, they see the gap. And that's where the bigger businesses, the ones who they're established, they've got a high quality product, because they pin themselves into a sub-market, they stop innovating for what the mass market looks at. And I was equally reading into Nike, their market share, their market cap has actually dropped by 50% from 2020 up until this was the end of 2024. And equally, a few arguments and reasons for that was what they were doing. They stopped focusing on their core competency being sport, athleisure wear, and they started going more so into political messages as opposed to being purely really bred for athletes. And a lot of people have complained that their designs have become quite ugly. They've stopped working with mass wholesalers. So it's interesting that you see these big businesses, and you see businesses that even they've got to a certain level, that innovation loop, or they go really astray, and that kind of comes to a fold.
Well, what you're putting your finger on is, I think, a double challenge is there is a struggle for definition, and then there is a struggle for narrative. So the struggle for definition is, as you talked about, those companies, they're defining themselves. How do they see themselves? Where do they fit within the market? What kind of company are they? What do they do? Who do they serve? That's an internal decision. And as you put, sometimes maybe you have the wrong self-definition. You think you're a kind of company that does X when you're really better off doing Y. Or that, I think you were mentioning the authors writing about sort of that story of becoming sort of too big for your britches, right? This is who we worked with, but we want to work with these entities. Whatever it is, that's a self-definition. But that definition, it's also how your customers, how the market defines you, how they view you. So you could have a self-definition that is a perfect match with how others see you. Other times it may not be a perfect match. And so you have to have that kind of awareness. And in many ways, this goes to that awareness of it's telling a story, but also seeing yourself in that story. So narrative, which is something that we do at Useful Fiction, what we call a strategic narrative, is understanding the role of story. Story is the oldest communication technology of all. We were using story to share ideas when we were, back in caves, and they might be ideas about new technologies. It might be ideas about culture. It might be ideas about how to organize, how to achieve our goals. Whatever it is, narrative is so crucial to success. But it's also incredibly helpful, not just in that definition, but as a strategic approach. So think about the characters in a story. There's how the characters see themselves, there's how they interact with the other characters, understanding those characters. So, I think the examples that you give reinforces that idea of enabling yourself to have the right definition of who you are, the market you're in, how your current or potential future customers define you, and then driving your story towards a perfect match. Or maybe it's the opposite. I'm not a perfect match now. I have a self-definition that doesn't match to the clients that I want to reach. Okay, how do we move towards that? How do you change towards that? What's your story going to be more effective?
So talking of Useful Fiction, could you, just for the sake of the listeners, give a bit of an insight into what you guys are currently doing right now?
Yeah, so Useful Fiction, it's the idea of the deliberate fusion of nonfiction research analysis, but wrapping it within narrative. The origin point for us was a book called Ghost Fleet that was both a novel, but it had 28 pages of research and notes baked in. And so it was using the format of the novel to teach lessons. A little more fun way of thinking about what Useful Fiction is. It's a lot like what I do to my kids in the morning. I sneak fruit and veggies into a smoothie. So if you think of your classic science fiction techno thriller, it's like a milkshake. It's designed for entertainment. Sometimes there's really good stuff in there. You think about like all the technologies that Star Trek inspired, but that's not why they're there. It's sort of like strawberries in a milkshake. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have your strategy document, your technology brief, your board report, your teaching manual. It's the kale of the business and policy world. And so what Useful Fiction is it brings those two together. Let's start with the facts. Let's start with what we're trying to communicate, but wrap it within scenario, wrap it within story. And so that origin point of the book, it became a bestseller, but it also drove all sorts of policy changes. We were asked to briefed the US president on what he needed to know about AI, to the US Navy created a $3.6 billion ship program that non-coincidentally had the same name as our book, Ghost Fleet. And so coming out of that, we started to work with government, primarily the military, but also other agencies, as well as corporations and nonprofits, on essentially helping them to figure out how to better tell their story. And sometimes it might be how do we tell our story to a partner, a funder. Other times it might be how do we tell that story inside our organization. We have a new strategy, but it's not going to succeed unless we get our workforce to understand and follow it. And we could give them the 30-page document, but they're probably not going to read it. Instead, let's turn it into some kind of narrative that's going to be used to drive change. And so that's what we do. You asked for an example. This last week, I'll give you two. One, we're working with a U.S. government agency on essentially their vision for the future over the next 10 years. And we're turning it into a novel and maybe even a video that lives out what would it look like if their strategy succeeded, but told through characters. The other thing we do is we run workshops. And so we ran a workshop for a government agency, basically teaching its members, and primarily scientists and program managers, on how do they explain the value of the technologies that they're working on, instead of just dropping bullet points and complex how quantum works. That's not how you're going to get the funder. How do you tell the story of its effect? What are scenarios that it might be fruitful? And so we just ran a workshop, and it was really fun as we had speakers that ranged from the former head of the US Navy to Hollywood writers, like people behind Fantastic Four, and who've written for Succession, all sorts of really cool projects, helping people to understand, how do I find the drama? How do I find the story out of this real world issue?
Fascinating. And I think naturally the point you made about everything you said that illuminated to me, and I'm sure most people who are listening, is you mentioned the conversations, the work you've done with the president. Can you delve any more into what you've done there, what that looks like at all?
So that came out of a project, and let me pull back on this. One of the biggest challenges that people have, again, whether it's in government, the military, to the private sector, is not just this issue of how do I tell the story, but how do I identify those future trends and particular technologies, and what will they mean for me? What will they mean for the world around me? And how do I transform to get ahead of them rather than reacting to them? And so several years back, we started a project essentially on what we called the real robotic revolution. And it was essentially looking at the topic of today, AI, and what is the effect that AI will have, not just across a series of business sectors, but also on society, on families, on politics. And one of the big issues for us was to both equip leaders to better understand key terms, key definitions, but also, and this is where I'm going to be a little bit kind of opinionated, to be able to sift through the hype and understand that while there is literal world-changing effects, we were arguing back then, to come from AI, that not all of them were going to be perfect. And that it would be incredibly disruptive. So, as examples, it was going to create certain types of new jobs, but there would be other jobs that would be either eliminated or we would need less of them. There would be new companies that would flourish. Other companies were going to be the losers of this. And then each of those would have effects that would play out. So, for example, someone who'd been trained and successful in one profession what happens is there's less of a need for people in that profession. And one of the things we particularly wanted to educate the leaders on was it's not just this, it's not just blue collar. It's not just going to be factory workers affected by automation. It might be things like, for example, contract lawyers, very successful field, make a lot of money from it. AI now is able to do it basically on par with the checking skills of a contract lawyer. So we're seeing less of them. And so that's what we were trying to do, is share that with leaders and to better equip them. But we did it through narrative. So we essentially, in written form, painted a picture of what life would be like in a city as you go everywhere from Starbucks to the train station, as you're going into work, you're interacting with the police. These are all the different ways that AI and robotics, drones, etc., are going to be used, and these are some of the effects of it. So it's sort of we call the idea a synthetic environment. You're dropping people into a world so that they can experience, in quotation marks, experience the facts of what's to come. I think the project bore out pretty well in terms of, we have a lot going on with AI right now, but we're also, I think, you and I are talking probably about 6 months ago, the hype was just exponential. Now people are starting to go, hold it, what's the effect of this? Also, there's a little bit of worry on everything from personal privacy to, is this an AI bubble, or how disruptive is it going to be to my company? What are the best ways to use it, but also what are the consequences of it? So that's what the project was on, was combining the understanding of AI, but telling it through story.
Amazing. We've had a few really good storytellers on this show. I'm curious, talking about the element of AI and looking at what you saw 6 months ago compared to what you're seeing today. What's your general sentiment? Do you believe that this is an AI bubble, or do you have a different view?
Oh gosh, now we're moving into so to be very clear, the project that we did was about 4 years back. So where I'm getting at is like the narrative now and the public discourse. I think I think it's a bubble in terms of bluntly the oversell of the technology, in terms of, you would see people describing it as a solution to so many different problems. It'll solve poverty. It'll solve healthcare. If we could hand over parts of politics to it, and we actually see like examples of that. But also, obviously, there's it's going to make everyone, you should invest in my enterprise because we're going to be the next unicorn. And that's where I come down on it is, so a unicorn in fantasy is a magical being that it's able to heal all problems. In investing, a unicorn is that company you put your money into, and then it becomes, it became a $1 billion company. Now we evaluate it even more. And guess what? No, unicorns are not real. And not every business can be a unicorn. So in terms of all the problems that it's been promised to solve, it'll improve areas. You can see deployment in areas like, helping with growth. But guess what? Poverty is not going to go away. Or you can use it to improve government, but it doesn't mean bureaucracy's going away, right? And so we keep seeing that. And then the same thing on the hype side in terms of, I think what a lot of people are interested in, sort of investment in the market. We have certainly a lot of deployment of AI into enterprises. It's creating certain efficiencies, and yes, it's like a equivalent of a new industrial revolution. But some of the promises made financially, I think, are going to be incredibly difficult to deliver on for those companies, sort of the bets that are being made. And there is a worry that I have of a double downing effect, sometimes in cases triple downing effect right now in terms of the investments, where to sort of keep things going, we're then investing in a different way. So I guess you're hearing from me sort of a reaction to that, years and years of this is going to solve everything, saying, hey, let's be a little more realistic about it. Be interesting for to play this, 2 5 years from now and see how what happens.
Yeah, certainly so. And the disruption naturally with most industries is there's this initial shock. I didn't see it with the World Wide Web. I wasn't old enough, but you've seen it with other innovations, whether it be cryptocurrencies or the e-commerce boom 5 or so years ago to now what's going on with AI. And I think a lot of people are now trying to scramble to think that artificial intelligence is going to solve every single problem within their business. But as you said, it is really it's a zero-sum game. There's winners and losers throughout society all throughout, and there's always, whether we like it or not, going to be poverty and poor people throughout society. And quite often, and I remember seeing this before, that if you were to evenly distribute the wealth amongst the global population, give it 5 years and 5% of the population would then again control, I think they said 95% of the wealth. That's kind of like the extreme Pareto principle at present, and has always been the case. But it's just a general understanding that there's a select cohort of people throughout the world who understand how the flow of money operates and what to do to generate it. And you see it with lottery winners as like an abstract example, that the majority of lottery winners lose or spend all of their money within a certain period of time because they inflate their lifestyle. And I think AI is largely here to help facilitate and help us with the real monotonous tasks within our operations and organizations. And there is a big ethical consideration that I'm now seeing, and it's being discussed with partners that we work with, and just in general of privacy, and seeing how far AI is going to get. Is it past the point of singularity or not is an argument. A lot of people will argue that it's at that point, and how disruptive is it, and what are its ulterior motives to what's going on throughout society. So there's a big conversation to be had there. I'm curious, Peter, just kind of taking a segue away from AI once again. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh gosh. I think I would, and I think there's the advice that I give to myself, but also like I'm frequently interact with people starting out on the field, and I would say, don't try and game what's popular right now, or even what people steer you towards in terms of it might be a profession to work in, it might be you're a writer, a topic to write on. Don't try and game the system, because the reality is whatever that topic is right now, that profession that's hot right now. First, it's going to change likely by the time you move on. So if you're 20, by the time, you were making comparisons, the field of AI to the .com, .bomb, whatever it is, that is probably not going to be the hot thing when you're 23, when you're 25, when you're 30, when you're 35. Secondly, if you enter into that profession, that topic, because someone else said it's hot, someone else said it's important, but you don't have that passion for it, you are not going to do well in it. If you're essentially trying to game out the system, that just means you're playing the game, but you're playing the game without enthusiasm. So for me, if it was advice to me, or a version of me out there right now, if I was thinking about, again, what profession to go into, what topic to study, whatever it is, it would be, what do I find intrinsically interesting? What do I think is going to be exciting? And that's the bet that I would make rather than trying to react to something else. And oh, by the way, the last part of this is if you're selecting that profession, that topic based on what's hot right now, your competition by definition is going to be higher because that's what a bunch of other people are trying to chase down. So instead, make a bet on yourself in terms of your interests, and that's going to be and what you think is going to be important, and that's what's going to stand you in good stead over the next 1, 5, 10, 20 years. And oh, by the way, part of it is because you'll have built up an experience that you'll be able to bring into whatever that next profession is, that next topic, rather than you tried to follow the crowd.
Well said. Peter, what's next for you and where can people find you?
So first, we're continuing to work on these projects related to what we call strategic narrative and also the topic that you described of AI. What we are in particular that might be helpful to people listening or watching. We've started up a series of workshops on 3 different topics. One is on strategic narrative. How do I find the story in my organization? How do I tell that story better? Second is on the topic of AI. What do leaders need to know about it? Not how do I use ChatGPT or the like, but rather what is it good for? What is it not good for? What are the issues that are going to be with AI, not just next month, next year, next 5 years? What's going to be enduring challenges in it? Also, some of the legal, ethical, policy questions that we need to figure out. And the final workshop is one on foresight and future skills. So not what is the future, but how can I build skills to identify what's coming and develop my own company and organization's reactions to them. So that's what we're up to. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn, but also Useful Fictions, useful-fiction.com. And again, I think this idea of what you're up to, of trying to understand and communicate around growth, is it's so fascinating. It very much nests within what we've been doing. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Peter.